Chronicles of Whetherwhy, The Age of Enchantment, is the first book in a new middle-grade magical fantasy series by Anna James. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book, and I'll talk with the author about the inspiration behind it. Anna James is an author and journalist whose previous books include the best-selling Pages and Company series. Anna, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, this is the beginning of a brand new series for middle grade readers. So tell us about the inspiration for it.
Yeah, so I'm always really rooted in basically what I love to read. I wouldn't be a writer if I wasn't a reader first. And so when I came to think about what I wanted to do after my last series, I thought, well, what do I love to read? And the answer there is fantasy, and particularly high fantasy. I grew up reading books like Earthsea and The Lord of the Rings and Narnia. And I really wanted to have a go at creating a completely new magical world from scratch. So that was kind of where it all grew from. And the magic is seasonal. So everyone on Whetherwhy has a little bit of magic to do with one of the seasons. And I think with magic systems, again, I go back to the things that feel magical in real life. So my first series, Pages and Co., book wandering, it's traveling inside of books, reading is a bit of magic. And I think when the seasons change, certainly here, I know seasons obviously differ a bit from place to place, but certainly here in London, when the seasons, we have, quite clearly marked seasons, and that feels a little bit magical. And I think that those things that have a bit of magic in real life are really good places to kind of build out magic systems from.
Well, this is the first book in what will be a series. So tell us more about this world that this series will inhabit.
So it's the island of Whetherwhy, and which has a gorgeous map at the front of the book drawn by David Wyatt. I would say it was quite a humbling experience passing over my very badly drawn map to David, who's such an incredible artist, for him to turn into a beautiful map. But so it's an island, and there's some clues in the book as to perhaps how Whetherwhy interacts with our world, but I won't spoil anything. But yeah, so it's an island. There's not a specific time period, but I find it quite helpful to have real life time periods. So I kind of used about the Regency period in England for references for technology, because you kind of want it to feel consistent. And as I say, so everyone has a little bit of magic from the seasons. And when you turn 13, you do a test to find out which season you're affiliated to. But some people discover that they are enchanters, which means that they can use the magic of all four seasons. So the first book is about twins Juniper and Rafferty, who, when they do their magical test, Juniper discovers that she is an enchanter. So she goes to the capital city of Stormgrove, to the Thistledown Academy of Enchantment.
Because to be an enchanter is a very rare thing. And as you pointed out, that means she can draw from the magic of all four seasons. So how does she take to that news?
Well, so she has had a bit of an inkling that she was an enchanter. She has a few sort of strange things, like she can always tell when it's going to rain. Sometimes kind of magical creatures are drawn to her. So she did have a bit of a suspicion, but she's actually very nervous about it because I wanted to write a family that was essentially happy. I think often in fiction, obviously you have the cliche of you got to get rid of the parents, at the start of the book. But for Juniper and Rafferty, they love where they live. They love their family. So the tension actually comes from the fact that Juniper has to leave. She has to go to Thistledown to learn more about that. So she's quite nervous about removing herself from this family unit. But Rafferty, not wanting to be left behind, decides to go with her. So the family are bookbinders, and he goes to get an apprenticeship at a bookshop and bookbinder in Stormgrove. So they have very different experiences of going to Stormgrove, but they essentially end up being able to support each other.
Well, tell us about some of the challenges that Juniper and her twin brother face, because I understand there are monsters lurking in the shadows.
Yeah, so the creatures in Whetherwhy are called the magical creatures, are knots and tangles. So the magic, when you learn to use magic, you learn to see the threads of magic that make up the island, and you pull on the different threads depending on what you need to weave your spell. So a tangle is essentially a friendly magical creature. And that is when an enchanter weaves a spell with the threads into a little tangle, and you make a creature that looks like an animal we know, but has a sort of magical twist. So you might have a poppy that's made out of autumn leaves, or there's a magpie that's made out, his feathers are made of glass. But if you weave magic without thought or care, then you might make a knot, and that is the scarier magical creature. So it might be a wolf that's made out of rust, or there's a stag who has like blood dripping from its antlers. And they crop up in different ways throughout the book, but there's a chase quite near the beginning of the book when they're on the way to the magical school, where four wolf knots start chasing the carriage, and Juniper sees the teachers from the school have to weave their magic very cleverly to protect them.
Well, this is a middle grade novel. What do you think middle graders in particular are attracted to stories about magic?
Well, I think we all, whatever age we are, would like to believe there is some magic in the world and see more magic in the world. I think it gives us a way to explore kind of who we are, what kind of powers we might like to have, what we would do with those powers. But I think that middle grade's an interesting one, because a lot of the books I referenced that I love, things like Lord of the Rings, obviously for older readers. And I think sometimes the middle grade space, I wanted to try and capture that high fantasy feel, but in a middle grade space. So there is some peril. We've mentioned the monsters, but it's a middle grade level of peril. And it's a world where even though there are monsters and villains, there is also always a friend close at hand, and also something good to eat as well.
So what do you think the kids will identify with the characters in your story?
Well, I hope that with Juniper, they identify with, those moments where life kind of shifts and changes a bit. Perhaps we end up, we go to a different school, we move house, and how you kind of grapple with those changes and how you find support from people around you. She's really learning to kind of be true to herself and to be brave. And then with Rafferty, he gets a lot of different ideas presented to him about how the world of Whetherwhy works. And he really has to kind of sort through what people are telling him and work out who he can trust and how to trust himself.
I'm talking with Anna James about Chronicles of Whetherwhy, the Age of Enchantment, and our conversation will continue. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. They're twins, but because their experiences now are going to be so different, knowing that she is an enchanter and she's now going to the specialized school to learn things, do their perceptions of the world sort of change in different ways that she might perceive it differently than he does?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was really important to me actually to show those different perspectives, even things like their journey to Stormgrove, because Juniper is going to this magical academy. She's taken in a magical carriage. The journey takes half the time it would. And even though some scary things happen, she's very well protected the whole time. And even when she's in Stormgrove, again, the perspective of being in this school, she's always got enough to eat and she's well looked after, even when scary things are happening. Whereas Rafferty has a bit of a different perspective. He has to go the normal way. He has to hitch a lift on the back of a carriage, and he meets a lot of different kinds of people. And that really affects their understanding of the place they live in, but also of magic itself. And the book really kind of delves into they're really grappling with, like, magic is essentially random. Who's an enchanter? There's only very few people, and they have to kind of grapple with ideas around, well, is that fair? And if it isn't fair, is that okay? And should we be able to share magic? And all of those kind of ideas of what they're grappling with.
Well, as you mentioned, it sounds like fairness is one of the themes that this book explores. What are some of the other things that you explore? Maybe in this book, but maybe you're looking ahead to this series that might explore different things that the kids are interested in and they'll take away from reading the books.
Sure. I think, as you say, I do think fairness is a big one. I think responsibility to other people, the fact that we all owe something to the people around us, whether in Whetherwhy or here, and that we owe the people we're around sort of honesty and integrity and trying our best to help other people along the way is really important to me. Also, Whetherwhy has it does have a kind of class system, and the books do kind of explore how those systems come to be and how we can support people, and whether sort of how power structures come to be and whether they're helpful or not helpful, and how we help other people within those power structures.
Well, there's a question that I like to ask authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from your novel, who would it be and why?
That's a great question. I think I would have to say a character she crops up a few times in this book, but she's even more present in the second book, which I've just finished writing. And she's called Ayla. And in Stormgrove, there's a night market on the last night of every month. And it's where you go to see your friends, eat some good food, but it's also kind of where you want to go if you need some secret magic, or you kind of want to meet someone maybe without any eyes on you. And Ayla always has something at the night market, whether it's an auction of magical goods or a menagerie of magical creatures. And she's a little bit hard to trust, perhaps. She's always got a deal on the go, but she would definitely know all the best places to go, the best places to eat, the people to talk to. If you wanted an adventure, Ayla would definitely be the person to hang out with.
One of the things I enjoy about asking that question is frequently, like you, it's not necessarily the main character because you feel like you've spent enough time with them. It's just these other people you're curious about and want to learn more about them.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think you do end up spending so much time as a writer thinking about your main characters that you feel like you have spent more than a day with them, and you kind of know how that day would go. Whereas you have these characters, these secondary characters that come in and cause havoc or adventure for your characters, and they come into the story and then you've got to let them go, but you're like, oh, hang on, you're fun. And that's actually part of the reason that Ayla ended up being a really big part of the second book, because I enjoyed writing her so much in the small scene she's in the first book.
Well, this book is for middle graders. I'm curious, what is it you enjoy about writing for this age group?
It's the best age group to write for. I think that it has the perfect balance of hope and magic with the ability to really craft rich and detailed worlds and characters that are grappling with more complex questions, but they're also books that, are full of hope and kindness. And I also like to write without cynicism, I think. I really enjoy being able to approach a book with sincerity and hope, and that being integral to it. And this age reader is also I love speaking to readers of this age because they're so smart and engaged and really starting to think about who they are and what they like to read. But there's still a little bit of them that wants to believe in magic.
I have a question about process, because I'm curious. It's one thing to write a book because you have to either plan that out or at least know where you're going, even if you're not the kind of person who outlines. And some authors have said, they write with a map, they outline things. Another says, I write with a compass. I know where I'm going and I figure it out on the way. But what I'm getting at is big enough challenge to write one book, but to write a series. Do you have to, as you're creating that series, kind of think of the whole arc of the series and where you're ultimately going?
So for me personally, I think with fantasy, it's really important to me that I spend the time with my world building and really understanding how the world and the magic works and the type of people who live there and how it all fits together. And then it's looking for the stories within that world. I've actually made it even harder for myself because this series, each book is set 13 years after the last one, because that also is just really rooted in what I love to read. I love books like Narnia and Earthsea where you meet characters and then in the next book or a few books later even, you maybe meet them as older characters. You meet young Prince Caspian and then he's an old king in a later book. And I loved that as a young reader. So I really wanted to try and capture that. So Juniper is very much an important part of the second book, but she's a young woman now. And there's a new child character who's kind of the center of the adventure. So that did take some planning. I've got quite an extensive timeline of when everyone was at Thistledown and who would know each other and where everyone lives. But it's all really rooted in, I really spent a long time when I first started writing the book of trying to get a really good handle on the island and the towns and the cities and transport and magic. And hopefully, fingers crossed, that will hold strong for the whole, there's going to be a quartet of books.
Well, I imagine that is going to be a real challenge for you because, like you said, you start out in the Regency period, so you had to do research about that period. And if it's 4 books, that's a little more than 4 decades later, and things will have changed. So your research is going to have to keep up.
Yeah, and Regency, it's not a kind of a magical Regency world. That's more of a kind of reference for language and technology and sort of transport and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's interesting because 40 years or just over 40 years, I suppose it's nearer to 50 by the time the series is finished. You know, if you think about even just between the 2 books, like the difference between now and 13 years ago, so some things are so different, but so much is still the same, and trying to have that so it feels consistent and all tied together has been quite a challenge. So I've done the second book, and I think it's all come together. But we'll see if I can keep it going for the third book, and be presumably even harder when I get to the 4th book. But hopefully the groundwork's been done.
This middle grade book is Chronicles of Whetherwhy, The Age of Enchantment by Anna James. It's the first in a new series. Anna, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you'd like to purchase Chronicles of Whetherwhy, The Age of Enchantment, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. Well, thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.